What if we say that the United States of America has secret biolabs all around the world where some of the most hideous and horrific experiments are conducted? And this includes Africa, where the United States has most biolabs working secretly and off the African government's radar. However, whenever these kinds of news are reported, people often consider them rumors. It's because the United States has successfully created a perspective that biolabs, where unethical experiments are done and bioweapons are created, is only a fictional idea existing only in films. But it becomes disturbing to know that these biolabs are a reality. What is done in these biolabs? And why does the United States not want the world to know about them? Let's know about everything in this video. If all of the United States biological laboratories were situated within its borders, it wouldn't be a matter of concern. However, research reveals that the U.S. stands as the sole country globally, with biological laboratories dispersed worldwide, including in Africa. Reports suggest the operation of over 30 biolabs in Africa and more than 400 worldwide by the U.S. This begs the question of why a country like the United States would need so many biolabs worldwide. Also, why does the U.S. have biolabs, where some of the most top-secret and human-related experiments are conducted? After pandemics like COVID-19 and viral diseases like AIDS, it has been established that these are the results of the experiments carried out in biolabs. The initial U.S. biolabs in Africa, established in the late 1990s to combat AIDS and malaria, have expanded to exceed 400 units. When questioned, the U.S. asserts its focus on researching global biological threats and finding solutions. Yet, suspicions arise that this may serve as a guide for the research and development of bioweapons, expanding their existing arsenal. Leading up to the Russia-Ukraine war, the Russian Defense Ministry claimed that the U.S. was utilizing Ukrainian laboratories to develop biological weapons, intending to distribute them via trained migratory birds and diseased bats. The U.S. denied these allegations, dismissing them as misinformation. However, documents obtained by Robert Kennedy Jr. unveiled U.S. military-funded labs in Ukraine, creating biological weapon components and testing them on the local population. Confirming this in 2023, Robert Kennedy Jr., a U.S. politician, acknowledged the existence of U.S. biolabs producing illegal bioweapons in Ukraine. Later, the U.S. officially admitted to running biolabs in Ukraine, making it clear that whatever it said was a lie. This also proves that the U.S. denial that it does not have biolabs worldwide is also a lie. By October 2023, the Russian defense once again expressed concerns, arguing that the U.S. was transferring its dual-use biological research to Africa. Suspicions mount that the U.S. is engaged in unlawful and hazardous experiments with potential bioweapon agents in African countries. Despite the consistent denials by the U.S., the truth remains that if Russia was honest about the initial claims, it's plausible that the current ones are accurate. Dr. Nalelo Breakfast, a senior lecturer at the Department of History and Political Studies at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, suggests that the U.S. is shifting its biological research to Africa to enhance its influence on the continent. Given Africa's strategic importance as a geopolitical battleground for major powers due to its resources, Dr. Breakfast believes that considering the existing U.S. military bases in Africa, the biolabs might seamlessly integrate into the military infrastructure. This raises questions about the necessity of dismantling foreign military bases on the continent. The report released by Russia on U.S. labs in Africa also implies that one reason for establishing biolabs on the continent is the ease with which the U.S. can conduct experiments on the local African population without significant resistance. Additionally, these experiments are considered more cost-effective in Africa and carry fewer reputational risks. While these U.S. labs may seem like facilities established to combat deadly diseases, the reality is that they pose a threat to the African continent. Just imagine how the disastrous consequences if strains of deadly diseases, be they viruses or pathogens, were to escape the lab, especially in a region lacking the expertise and equipment needed to contain such diseases. Interestingly, incidents along these lines have occurred multiple times. According to reports by experts, whenever there has been an outbreak of an epidemic in Africa, a U.S. lab has been in close proximity. In Liberia, for instance, articles published by Dr. Cyril Bruck, an expert in infection and microbiological diseases, condemned the United States for creating and spreading Ebola fever pathogens. Dr. Cyril found that epidemic outbreaks coincided with regions where American biological laboratories were located. He further alleged that the U.S.'s covert operations aimed at creating and spreading deadly viruses, claiming that Ebola and AIDS were genetically modified organisms developed by military organizations in North America as biological weapons, specifically delivered to Africa for testing at Kema City State Hospital in Sierra Leone, resulting in over 13,000 deaths due to the Ebola virus. Recent revelations expose the operation of a covert American laboratory, financially backed by the George Soros and Bill and Melinda Gates foundations. Despite persistent U.S. assertions denying the experiments for bioweapons in their biolabs, reports showing otherwise emerge. These facilities, often shrouded in high-security protocols and obscured by secrecy, raise suspicion, particularly during outbreaks, fueling an ongoing challenge to pinpoint the origin of epidemics. The Ebola virus outbreak adds a compelling layer, featuring specialists predominantly composed of Europeans and Americans. In this crisis, over 250,000 blood samples were gathered without patient consent, an ethically questionable maneuver. These samples were then transported to Europe and the U.S. for studies, providing European and American pharmaceutical corporations with unauthorized genetic data of the Africans. This controversial action yielded substantial savings, amounting to billions of dollars, in developing a vaccine. A disturbing case emerged with a Guinean woman identified by code C15, whose blood, containing the Ebola virus, is commercially accessible on the website of the European Virus Archive, housed at Germany's Bernhard Nocht Institute for Tropical Medicine. Priced at $3,637, it surpasses the value of gold by 170 times. This underscores the unsettling reality that conducting bioresearch in Africa is more cost-effective and more lucrative for the West, which is willing to sell literally everything consumers can pay for. The ethical breach is further exacerbated by the absence of compensation for those whose blood was taken without consent. Notably, the precise number of collected blood samples remains undisclosed, with American and European medics citing national security concerns. This prompts the question: how does the withholding of this information align with national security interests? Adding to the complexity, despite the extensive collection of blood samples from African citizens, scientists from Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea are denied access to conduct their independent research. The U.S.'s refusal raises significant doubts about the selfless motives behind these bioresearch initiatives. If the goal is genuinely for the benefit of Africa and the global community, denying access to African scientists raises valid concerns. The situation remains both perplexing and worrisome. Recent reports reveal that Africa has the highest concentration of U.S. biolabs, with Uganda emerging as a focal point of American interest. The United States has established a significant network, including medical research centers, institutes, medical schools, and biolabs, including those situated within prisons. According to these reports, American biologists engage in research on hazardous viral respiratory infections, often involving prisoners, seemingly without concerns about potential repercussions. In Uganda, the incidence of tuberculosis among prisoners reportedly surpasses that of the civilian population by 3 times. Officially, U.S. labs in the region declare a mission to prevent and counter biohazards, emphasizing the protection of the local population. However, concerns arise due to their direct subordination to the Pentagon, which includes collecting materials and information from the local population and gathering DNA from African individuals. Despite global apprehensions regarding the associated risks of these biothreats, the United States is determined to expand its network of biological laboratories across the African continent. This expansion raises the prospect of new biothreats. Africa's strategic allure to the United States lies in its seemingly vulnerable population, with international organizations, including the World Health Organization, potentially facing challenges in holding the Pentagon accountable. Adding complexity, a significant portion of the World Health Organization's funding originates from the United States. You should know that the official initiation of the U.S. biological weapons program took place in the spring of 1943, following directives from President Franklin Roosevelt. Post-World War II, the program spanned 27 years and witnessed the accumulation of a significant stockpile of biological agents and weapons. Throughout this period, the program weaponized and stockpiled 7 bioagents, including Bacillus anthracis and Francisella tularensis. Operated covertly, the U.S. bioweapons program carried out both laboratory and field testing, some of which involved the use of stimulants on individuals who did not give consent. The primary objective of the official U.S. policy was to deter the use of bioweapons against U.S. forces, with a secondary focus on retaliation if deterrence failed. In 1969, President Richard Nixon brought an end to all offensive aspects of the U.S. bioweapons program. By 1975, the U.S. had ratified international treaties, including the 1925 Geneva Protocol and the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, which outlawed biological warfare. However, as is the U.S. habit, despite signing protocols, the U.S. continued conducting experiments in biolabs to make biological weapons. The U.S.'s interest in biological warfare traces back to the conclusion of World War I, where tests involving ricin, a toxin from the castor plant, were conducted. In the early 1920s, proposals for a U.S. biological weapons program emerged within the Chemical Warfare Service (CWS). However, the chief of the CWS dismissed such a program as unprofitable. During World War II, the U.S. Army initially deemed biological weapons impractical, a viewpoint in contrast to nations like France, Japan, and the United Kingdom. In 1941, heightened interest in biological weapons led to the War Bureau of Consultants (WBC) creation in response to Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson's request. The WBC advocated for the establishment of an offensive biological weapons program. Under the influence of British pressure and the WBC's research findings, President Franklin Roosevelt sanctioned the American Biological Weapons Program in November 1942. The War Research Service (WRS) was subsequently established to oversee the program. The U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories were founded in 1943 at Fort Detrick in Maryland. Initially subcontracted to universities under George Merck, the program rapidly expanded and eventually fell under the complete control of the CWS. By November 1943, facilities in Indiana, Mississippi, and Utah were constructed. The public remained ignorant of wartime biological weapons research until January 1946, due to the effective security measures at Camp Detrick. Throughout the Cold War period, spanning from 1947 to 1969, the United States underwent a substantial transformation in its biological warfare initiative. Emerging from the aftermath of World War II, this program shifted from an operation at the factory level to a more covert and contentious military-driven research and production endeavor. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. By 1950, the primary U.S. bioweapons facility had firmly established itself at Camp Detrick in Maryland, under the Research and Engineering Division of the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. While Camp Detrick was the hub for research and development, production and testing occurred at diverse locations such as Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and Dugway Proving Ground, Utah. Pine Bluff Arsenal commenced the production of weapons-grade agents by 1954. Biological warfare research expanded considerably during the Cold War, with both the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force significantly enhancing their programs, particularly in the field of delivery systems. This era witnessed the United States and the Soviet Union amassing a sufficient quantity of biological weapons to pose a global threat. Legal proceedings, including the trial of John W. Powell and others for sedition related to the alleged use of biological weapons during the Korean War, resulted in affidavits affirming the U.S. Army's capability for both offensive and defensive biological and chemical weapons during a specific time frame. A noteworthy expansion phase occurred during the Kennedy-Johnson years, marked by the initiation of Project 112 in 1961. Field testing of biological weapons involved covert experiments with simulants and agents dispersed across extensive areas. Notably, Operation Sea Spray in 1950 included the release of bacteria in the San Francisco Bay Area. Concerns from scientists such as Theodore Roseberry emerged against the development of biological weapons during this period. Roseberry's warnings, echoed by others like Harvard biologist Matthew Meselson in 1969, underscored the potential security risks associated with these programs. The Vietnam War brought public attention to the U.S. biological weapons program, with international criticism mounting over the use of chemicals and herbicides like Agent Orange. Controversial human research programs and open-air experiments further fueled public outcry. In response to growing negative perceptions and the realization that biological weapons could become a form of asymmetric warfare, the Nixon administration took action. In 1972, President Nixon unilaterally renounced the U.S. biological warfare program, culminating in the signing of the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. This marked a definitive end to the era of U.S. involvement in biological warfare. However, the recent reports on the U.S. secret biolabs across the world, Russia's accusation, and the U.S. admitting having biolab in Ukraine prove that the U.S. never ended its biological weapons development program. President Nixon did end it, but it was all superficial. The Pentagon continued to carry out the program with only one difference: that was to keep the program secret. The COVID-19 pandemic threw the world into chaos, underscoring the susceptibility of global stability to a virus that proves challenging to contain. The realization that viruses can profoundly impact the world economy more than conventional warfare or military conflicts has gained widespread recognition. Amid the coronavirus crisis, international focus has shifted to various organizations engaged in biological research. Notably, attention has zeroed in on American facilities working on a COVID-19 vaccine. However, criticisms have arisen due to perceived transparency issues, with the U.S. maintaining secrecy about these activities, while similar labs in other countries operate more openly. These covert research centers, reportedly funded by the United States, are scattered across Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Africa. Some experts even suggest that American involvement may have played a role in triggering the Ebola outbreak. However, U.S. laws specify that any biological research conducted by American laboratories must be solely for civilian purposes and pose no threat to local populations. Efforts are underway to uncover the truth and comprehend the actual ongoing activities within the U.S.-funded African biological laboratories. The first U.S. laboratories in Africa emerged in the late 90s, initially focused on combating AIDS and malaria. However, over the years, the number of these facilities has surged. Concerns have arisen over American labs' proliferation, locations, and epidemic outbreaks in specific African regions. Dr. Cyril Broderick, an expert in infections and microbiological diseases, published articles in Liberia's largest newspaper, the Liberian Observer, condemning the U.S. for allegedly creating and spreading Ebola fever pathogens. He asserted that epidemic outbreaks coincided with the presence of American biological laboratories. Dr. Broderick claimed that the U.S. engaged in covert operations to develop and spread the deadly virus. He went further, suggesting that Ebola and AIDS were genetically modified organisms created by North American military organizations as biological weapons, intentionally introduced to Africa for testing. Various sources have reported alternative versions of the spread of the Ebola virus. Some American alternative media outlets highlighted an emergency at Kenema City State Hospital in Sierra Leone during an Ebola outbreak that claimed over 13,000 lives. The hospital housed an American laboratory funded by George Soros and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. The potential threat posed by these biolabs is significant, with any system failure carrying catastrophic consequences for individual countries and the entire world. In the event of a biological weapon accidentally escaping control and causing mass casualties, proving the involvement of American foundations could be challenging. Africa houses an expansive network of medical research centers with diverse specialized missions. These tasks encompass discovering, selecting, studying, and classifying natural pathogens, such as viruses, bacteria, and fungi. The laboratories identify the most dangerous pathogens, conduct research on their genomes and mutations, develop vaccines, test the efficacy of vaccines, and ensure their preservation. The U.S. State Department has affirmed that American biological laboratories collaborate with local African authorities to detect new disease cases, manage epidemiological situations, and investigate outbreaks. Notably, there are at least 30 American biolabs in Africa. While these labs officially focus on preventing and countering biohazards to safeguard the local population, they operate directly under the jurisdiction of the Pentagon. Their involvement spans comprehensive preparations for disease studies, including the collection of materials and information from the local population and the gathering of DNA from African individuals. This data is subsequently transmitted to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency (DTRA), controlled by the Pentagon, serving as a crucial component of the entire U.S. defensive system responsible for chemical and biological defense research. DTRA has established an extensive network of medical facilities in over 25 countries, spanning regions like Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Jordan, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines, Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and various African states. DTRA has directly established some of these medical centers, and their activities receive funding from the agency. The agency frequently deploys military biologists to civilian laboratories in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services (HHS) or private contractors. These contractors operate beyond the scrutiny of the U.S. Congress, enjoying a degree of autonomy due to the lack of oversight. Although the Biological Weapons Convention, adopted in 1972, mandates the U.S. to share biological defense information annually with other nations, this obligation is confined to data related to Pentagon programs, excluding those of private contractors or other government agencies. You see, programs with suspicious reputations are often assigned to entities like the CIA, HHS, or private contractors. For example, the CH2M Hill Company oversees various biological research programs connected to the Pentagon, CIA, and other government structures. The company holds a $341.5 million contract with DTRA as part of the Pentagon's Uganda Biolabs program. This complex approach to concealing U.S. biological research arises from stringent legal regulations and substantial financial investments. Notably, all experiments and tests in the United States must be exclusively conducted on animals. Consequently, major military centers and pharmaceutical companies engage in covert operations and biological research in third-world countries, utilizing the local population for the cost-effective gathering of biological materials and vaccine testing. Africa has an extensive network of medical research centers, many of which are linked to U.S. government structures. Uganda stands out as a focal point of significant interest from the United States. Upon delving into documents outlining collaboration between Uganda's governmental bodies and Washington, a noticeable pattern emerges. Most medical research centers, institutes, medical schools, and biolabs, including those within prisons, were established by the United States. These entities collectively constitute a larger interconnected network. For example, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency (DTRA) of the U.S. operates a laboratory in Arua City, northwest Uganda, in close proximity to a city prison also financially backed by the United States. This raises concerns that American biologists might be conducting research on dangerous viral respiratory infections using prisoners, seemingly without fearing consequences. Expanding beyond this, the DTRA funded the establishment of a biological laboratory near Namulonge, central Uganda, in early 2019. Under the supervision of the National Institute of Animal Husbandry, its mission focuses on the early detection of murine, brucellosis, and anthrax. The fact that this facility, funded by the Pentagon, operates within a civilian context raises suspicions, especially considering stringent security measures and numerous undisclosed animal experiments. The activities of U.S. biological laboratories in African countries remain veiled in secrecy, complicating efforts to gather comprehensive information. The analysis of available facts suggests that, under the guise of humanitarian efforts, American bioengineers collect DNA globally and subject unsuspecting individuals to tests with dangerous viruses. The results of these African tests are then sent to the United States, contributing to the enrichment of medical corporations and the defense sector. What do you think? What more does the United States do in these biolabs? Isn't it possible that the pandemic we experience is the result of bioweapons created in these biolabs? Let us know your thoughts on why the reports on US biolabs worldwide are hidden from the general public. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.